in and make that part of your day as well. It's only an hour, so it goes by really fast too, as we found out here. I tell our guest host and I tell our guests this will go by fast, and I don't think everybody always believes me on that, but once you've done it, there's so much going on. And so and we would like to hear what you think about what's happening, what we talk about on this program today, or maybe you have some concerns about another issue. Text us today, 502-571-0970 on the Kentucky's Voice text line. And eventually we'll be able to take some calls here, but we've gotten a lot of involvement on our text line, and I think it's a great way to engage. You can share your comments, and then we can use them as they fit into the program, depending on what we're talking about. And I'd love to hear from you on whatever you're thinking today, but especially on what we're talking about. I want to start out today by talking about a great analysis of Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear and his comments at the recent No Kings Town Hall. These comments were made last week in preparation for the so-called No Kings event protest on Saturday. And Governor Andy Beshear is trying to increase his liberal chops with the radical base of his party. But the great, talented, and nationally respected Peter Heck, in his publication, Not the Bee, titled "The Governor of Kentucky is Most Radically Authoritarian Moderate You'll Ever Meet." And that great picture there that you saw appeared in that column as well. But Peter Heck writes, if the Democrat Party were truly interested in winning back the presidency, they would stop elevating the fringe and look towards what is popularly understood to be their more moderate wing. In short, less AOC, less Newsom, Whitmer, Buttigieg, and Harris, more Shapiro, more Kelly, more Beshear. That last one, he says, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear continues to be an enigma, not because he has been all that influential, popular, or effective, but because of his ability to navigate the staunchly conservative political environment of Kentucky to win 2 terms as the state's governor as a Democrat. Consider that this last week, Beshear appeared at a national town hall that featured more than one radical leftist, Al Sharpton, Randy Weingarten, and Leah Greenberg. They were all shrieking and squealing at a No Kings protest promotional event, and right there with them was the so-called moderate governor of Kentucky. For more than one of us here in the Midwest, Peter Heck writes, it's more than comical to see Beshear protesting against authoritarian leadership given his own record in the Bluegrass state. Just a few years ago, you would have found Governor Beshear more than happy to don his own royal crown as he bellowed one dictate after another from his throne in Frankfort. Those needing or wanting what he declared to be elective surgeries were denied. Children were denied the ability to attend school. Mass gatherings defined by Beshear's own arbitrary self-serving standards were forbidden. Prisoners that Beshear personally decided were, quote, medically at risk, end quote, were released back into the general population. Peter Heck writes, doing what even those governors considered further left wouldn't do, Beshear intentionally and specifically targeted the First Amendment rights of Christian churchgoers. Here's the headline from CNN. Kentucky will take down license plates of people attending Easter services and order them to quarantine. Talk about being tone deaf. I mean, at Easter time of all times to do this in Bible Belt state like Kentucky. The article said officials are aware of about 6 churches planning to hold in-person services. State Governor Andy Beshear said in the statement, the state police will record attendees' license plates and notify them it is a misdemeanor violation of orders issued by state health officials, the governor said. Quote, local health officials then will contact the people associated with those vehicles and require them to self-quarantine for 14 days. This is the only way we can ensure that your decision doesn't kill someone else, Beshear said. Of course, writes Peter Heck, Beshear added in an extra dose of spiritual shaming by telling Christians that daring to gather and worship their Savior on Easter was failing, quote, to love your neighbor, end quote. The Kentucky governor, he says, is far from the only public official who overstepped his authority during the COVID years and let the power go to his head. But Beshear is unique in that he is one of the only ones to have done so while still getting to prance around under the media bequeathed label of moderate while condemning others for acting like kings. I don't disagree, he said, that Beshear would be less destructive to the American way of life than someone like AOC or Buttigieg. But the fact that he's considered a moderate on the left today tells us all we need to know about the modern Democratic Party. That from the great Peter Heck in Not the Bee. Great publication, by the way. So I want to talk for a moment today here on this program about political hypocrisy. Governor Beshear's whole career has been about carefully crafting an image as a moderate Democrat who can win in red Kentucky, and yet he's hanging out with some of the most radical players possible. Randy Weingarten, who is a radical teachers union boss of the American Federation of Teachers, who came to Kentucky and campaigned with Beshear on October 15th against Amendment 2, which would have allowed public funds for private school education. They campaigned together at Consolidated Baptist Church in Lexington. Weingarten is accusing supporters of school choice. She accuses them of undermining democracy. Beshear echoed her, urging voters to reject the measure and consult public educators who, quote, he said, know the truth. Now, this wasn't just a policy disagreement. It was a high-profile alliance with a radical leftist, Randy Weingarten, whose rhetoric often veers into hyperbole. She's called school choice advocates extremists, and as I said, who oppose democracy. Beshear's decision to stand shoulder to shoulder with her signals comfort with her combative style, even as he publicly preaches unity. That's the problem with this guy. So let's hear some of the comments he made. Here's Beshear speaking at a so-called No Kings Town Hall event last week, urging Democrats to avoid extremism and welcome people back when Trump's policies overreach.
I think people don't like extremism. And I don't think we have to qualify any side for that. But what we're seeing right now is most definitely extremism. We ought to be a nation of laws, a nation that tries to respect one another, a nation that tries to listen to different views, but certainly never goes to what we're seeing right now. And I hope a nation that believes that strength is not owning the other side or pushing someone down.
So Andy Beshear's criticism of right-wing extremism while aligning with left-wing activists, that's a double standard, folks. He condemns radical behavior on the right, but embraces it on the left. It's radical for me, but not for thee posture. And it's the height of hypocrisy. And he stands on the stage with somebody like Randy Weingarten, who considers me to be an opponent of democracy because I favor giving parents in Kentucky the option of choosing the educational setting that best fits their child's needs. And she says that we're extremists who oppose democracy. And so Beshear campaigned with her against school choice, against education freedom, against reforms, against any change in the status quo, even though we're terribly failing our public schools students. And he also is on this, check out this picture of him and these other radicals with, including Leah Greenberg, who is co-founder of Indivisible. It's a key figure in Beshear's orbit. Check that out, who is nothing, if at all, if not a radical. She called Trump's immigration policies, quote, a fascist blueprint and urged supporters to resist at every turn. She has made other radical comments like, we don't know how bad it's going to get, how fast. We should expect the Trump administration is stocked with people who want to retaliate against their enemies. It's fear-mongering. It's stoking division. And she's all about that. She's all about that. And also on X, posts like those from at Hotamali02 and Jay Nada labeled Greenberg and Levin radical communists behind the No Kings campaign, accusing them of funding LA riots and promoting anti-American agendas. So Greenberg's statements, particularly her calls to resist and her warnings of retaliation, they're seen by conservatives as inflammatory, contrasting sharply with Beshear's public calls for unity. But then again, his willingness to align with her suggests he's actually comfortable with her rhetoric when it suits his political goals. So here's Beshear speaking of a so-called No Kings Town Hall event last week, urging Democrats to avoid extremism and yet standing with those who are among the most extreme. And by the way, Andy Beshear is wants unity as long as everybody agrees with him. I might talk a little more about that coming up on the other side in our next segment here on Kentucky's Voice. Don't go away as we talk about radical for me, but not thee.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Radical for me, but not for thee. That's Andy Beshear's modus operandi these days. He wants to build his creds with the left wing of his party, the Democratic Party, so that he can run for higher office. He's a very ambitious man, very political person, very partisan person, despite his all-shucks moderate persona, which he has carefully crafted. But at some point in time, the real Andy Beshear is standing up here. And what we're finding is that his criticism of right-wing extremism is not matched by his action. So his talk is cheap. His talk is not really where he's at, apparently, because he's appearing in town hall meetings with radical leftists like Randy Weingarten and Leah Greenberg of Indivisible and the Reverend Al Sharpton and other radical leftists and activists. It's a double standard, folks. He condemns radical behavior on the right, but embraces it on the left. And this is radical for me, but not for thee posture that defines his hypocrisy. Let me tell you something. Andy Beshear comes off in these scripted appearances as kind of an all-shucks moderate. Oh, Lucy, isn't he a nice guy? Kind of a moderate, reasonable guy. But he is not reasonable with those who disagree with him. If you happen to have a different view about school choice, about our state, about who should get the credit, about policies, on, Andy Beshear is not reasonable. He doesn't exude the same call for unity with those who disagree with him. I mean, how is it reasonable to accuse Kentucky families who want choices for their children as seeking to destroy public education, or, as Randy Weingarten said, being opposed to democracy? How is it moderate to pick and choose which companies are essential and which are not during a pandemic? How is it reasonable to allow the bars and questionable establishments to remain open and shut down churches, shut down small mom and pop businesses, destroy businesses? Those who criticize Trump for his overreach, I think if you don't do the same thing for Beshear, you're just as hypocritical as he is. Andy Beshear's alliances with figures like Greenberg, whose radical rhetoric fuels division, and his selective criticism of extremism shows he's more interested in national applause, the applause of national progressives, than he is advancing, advocating, supporting Kentucky's conservative values. His COVID overreach shows that, I think, as much as anything. It really, I think, only deepens the contradiction. So he can talk about how he's moderate. He can talk about unity. Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap with Andy Beshear. He is not walking the walk. 502-571-0970. Love to hear what you think about this, and we'll get to these texts in a moment. But I want to switch gears for a minute here and talk about how some of Kentucky's own in Washington, folks like Congressman Thomas Massie, Senator Rand Paul, Senator Mitch McConnell, are pushing back on President Donald Trump's policy. It's making for some interesting debate and some conjecture about where all this is going to go. Are these folks standing up for Kentucky, or are they poking the bear and risking our state standing with the White House? Thomas Massie on the floor of the U.S. House recently talking about the big, beautiful reconciliation bill. Go with that clip.
Well, I'd love to stand here and tell the American people, we can cut your taxes and we can increase spending and everything's going to be just fine. But I can't do that because I'm here to deliver a dose of reality. This bill dramatically increases deficits in the near term, but promises our government will be fiscally responsible 5 years from now. Where have we heard that before? How do you bind a future Congress to these promises? This bill is a debt bomb ticking. Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg. If something is beautiful, you don't do it after midnight.
So these three, Congressman Massie, Senators McConnell and Paul, have been dubbed the Bluegrass Resistance by some media outlets, national media outlets, for their vocal pushback on Trump's agenda. What are the policies that they're opposing? Well, the big one is tariffs, the big divide, if you will. Trump's tariffs, 25% on Canadian goods, 10% on most trading partners, up to 60% on some imports. They're all part of his economic plan. They're all things he said he was going to do if he was elected. He is doing what he said he would do. He says they'll protect American jobs, bring in revenue. But Massie, Paul, and McConnell are disagreeing. Rand Paul calls tariffs simply taxes that hit American families with higher prices on everything from groceries to bourbon. Here's Senator Paul talking about the impact of tariffs on Kentucky.
Very good conversation with the president this week about tariffs. He did most of the talking, and we don't agree exactly on the outcome. But when I come home to Kentucky, I talk to the Farm Bureau, which is opposed to the tariffs. I talk to the bourbon industry, which is opposed to the tariffs. I talk to the cargo companies, UPS, DHL, all of their pilots are opposed to it. I talk to the hardwood floor people. I talk to the people selling houses, building houses. I have no organized business interest in Kentucky for the tariffs. So I think it's worth the discussion, and it's worth people remembering that the Republicans used to be for lower taxes. Tariffs are a tax. So if you raise taxes on the private sector, that's not good for the private sector.
So here's the million-dollar question. Are Massie and Paul still on Team Trump, or are they going rogue? We might say it's complicated in some respects, but look, both these guys, they're libertarian-leaning conservatives. They've praised Trump at times. I think people tend to forget that when these disagreements come up. So let's have overall perspective here. Paul, he really cheered Trump's picks, for example, for shrinking the federal workforce, saying, Dios mío, what courage. Massey, despite primary threats from Trump, has said that Trump's attacks are more for show than personal. They even had a cordial chat in a caucus meeting. Both align with Trump on many issues, deregulation, Second Amendment rights. But their principles, low taxes, free markets, limited government, they're going to clash on some issues like tariffs, like big spending bills. So yes, they generally support Trump. And after having some conversations on this with folks who know what's going on, I'm convinced that they do. There's lots of support for Donald Trump there, but they're not afraid to break ranks and publicly even. And I think that's been where the story is, that they're willing to say some things publicly about their disagreements. See, I don't think that's unhealthy. I think that's a good idea. I think it's healthy to have these debates. I mean, go back to the founding of our country. How did the Constitution come about? How did the Bill of Rights come about? How did the Declaration of Independence be written? It came out of lots of disagreement, lots of discussion. And the media, the national media in particular, they don't really have that historic perspective. And I think we have to keep that as conservatives, to understand that disagreements don't have to be a bad thing. They're not necessarily unhealthy. And I think that what we have here, people on the same team, people in the same family, if you will, maybe having some disagreements within the family, and I think that can be healthy. Now, the problem would be is if this hurts Kentucky. Will this hurt our state? Does Trump see Kentucky in a negative light because of this? And here's the good news is I don't think so at all, because Kentucky was one of his strongest states, has been one of his strongest states in really all three elections that he has run in. One he lost, of course, but the two he won, we had some of the highest percentages of votes for Donald Trump of any state in America. I think Indiana might have been next. But look, Trump knows this, and this is a big deal with him. This is probably going to trump, pardon the pun here, but this is probably going to trump any specific policy disagreement that he might have with some of our congressional delegation. And look, I think that we have to be careful when we talk about tariffs to understand that there's going to be consequences. Now, maybe they're short term, and maybe in the long term they bring great benefit. There's not the history doesn't really say that. So these are legitimate, healthy disagreements. There's a lot these guys agree on too, though. Let's not forget that. And I think Team Trump is stronger than ever. And we'll talk more about that coming up here on Kentucky's Voice. Stay with us here. Thanks for joining us today. 502-571-0970. Hey, Tom, let's wait till the last segment you went to so they can get you set up.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio online.
Can you go ahead?
kyvoice.org.
All right, Jim Waters back here with you on Kentucky's Voice Radio, 502-571-0970. Does the disagreement between Kentucky's congressional delegation and Trump on issues, does it hurt our state? I don't think so, and I think Senator McConnell really kind of captured this in some comments he made, actually at an event around the election, but I thought it was really good, the tone that he had, and I want to play this clip of Senator McConnell talking about Trump and conservatives and all Republicans agreeing on what matters most. Go ahead with that.
Donald Trump has backed things like some of his signature policies have included, the wall on the Mexican border, mass deportations, birtherism. Are you worried at all that he is doing to the Republican Party now what Goldwater did to the Republican Party by voting against the Civil Rights Act?
No, I don't think so. He said some things that I certainly disagree with, and you listed several of them right there. But the presidency is bigger than simply the president. It's the Congress, it's the people you have to work with, it's the policies that have been in place. I think more important is looking at the Republican platform here at the convention, which is very similar to the last Republican platform. We haven't changed America's right of center party. We are America's conservative party. The Democrats are America's liberal party. Donald Trump may differ from time to time on some of those issues, but fundamentally, if he's elected, this will be a right of center administration.
And he's right. And I'm joined by my co-host, Tom Fawbush. And Tom, thanks for popping in here. Let's talk. I know we've been concerned about this, and I think it's a good time to have a little group discussion about this. I think that's an important point that Senator McConnell made, and that I think, I know people have issues with him and don't think he's strong enough on some things, but at times I think there's something to be said about a little bit of calm and perspective on what's really happening. The perspective here is, as he said, the platform has not changed, the platform of the party, and I think that's really important because that's really where the major priorities are. And we may have these disagreements. We're going to have disagreements. Not everybody's going to see the world the same. I mean, look, if Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had disagreements, I think it's okay for Senator Rand Paul and Donald Trump to have disagreements, but I think it's important that the priorities remain the same. What are your thoughts about what you're seeing?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I was just talking with a colleague.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll get this for the last segment, but I just think that let's keep a proper perspective on this, and I tell you what, elections have consequences, okay, and they can be both positive and negative. Elections, the positive upside of this is here that Trump has such strong support in our state that these minor, skirmishes don't really, they're really minor, okay, in the overall perspective, and they're not permanent. They're ongoing because, the tariff policy, as Donald Trump has said, this is to get people to the table. This is to get nations to the table, to negotiate, to get a better deal for America. And I think once we see that happen, I think you're going to see some backing away of some of the really more consequential tariff policies because they're not meant for long-term policies, but they're meant to right the ship, to level the playing ground, if you will, and to make sure that America gets the best deal that we can get. And that's the purpose of these. So that's a different thing than talking about, like whether we're pro-life or not, right? That's a major platform plank in our platform. So that's a big difference. And I think it's really important for folks on our side of the aisle to keep that in mind. And, just to remember that, and I think it's it makes Kentucky that much more interesting. We have an interesting political environment here anyhow. I mean, even if Trump wasn't involved. I mean, we've got a Democratic governor who won re-election in an election that actually made the legislature even redder than it was. He's a Democrat. He wins re-election. He wins election, first of all, in a state with a supermajority of Republicans. He wins re-election in a state in an election that makes the legislature even redder, even more conservative. And yet, then we have the state that goes so strongly for Trump, one of the strongest, highest percentages of the vote for Trump in the nation among any state, with Indiana being right there with us. So this part of the country, very strong, pro-Trump part of the country. And yet, we have these guys, Senator McConnell, reelected many times. Senator Paul, reelected many times. Congressman Massey, reelected in spite of Donald Trump's threats of primaries. So here, what we've got here is the voters speaking loudly, saying, you know, we want to have healthy debate. We don't want everybody being a yes guy. We don't want everybody being a rubber stamp for policies. And it's okay to have disagreements, but on the big things, we want you to agree. You know, lower taxes, individual freedom, pro-life, pro-family, pro-gun, Second Amendment. That was one of the things that came out of these, the Bluegrass dynamic trio here. They all agree on these things, and I think we have Tom Fawbush now with us. But Tom, thanks for popping in here for a few minutes.
Absolutely. Jim,
go ahead.
great job today setting this up and sort of framing the issue. And I guess a lot of it depends on too is how you view the current moment we're in. And so I was just speaking with our colleague Andrew Cooper-Ryder earlier today and about this, and he was describing it this way. He goes, I think Rand Paul and Thomas Massey and a lot of these libertarians, they see this crisis, this financial crisis, coming at us like a train, like a freight train. And about 10 years out, maybe the country's just going to implode financially if we don't do something now. And that, in their mind, that is a huge concern, and that's the crisis that they feel like we need to address. On the other hand, I think you see those in the MAGA movement, and myself included, that we see ourselves in a crisis now. We're sort of in a Victor Davis Hanson will say this a lot. We're in a counter-revolutionary moment right now, and so we've literally have gone through a cultural revolution in the country on social issues and even economic issues, and just the burden of the federal government and the deep state and all this. We are at a crisis moment now where we need all hands on deck in order to deal with it, because we have such a weight, such a headwind of this huge apparatus of elite capture of all the institutions and government. And so we need all hands on deck. And Paul and Massey, you are being counterproductive.
Well, what's that mean, though? All hands on deck, what's that mean? Does that mean we don't have any debate or disagreement?
Exactly.
No, I don't think so.
Exactly.
Here's from our Kentucky's Voice text line. I'm not sure why, said the texter, but it needs to be noted that Kentucky has had only 2 Republican governors since 1975, Ernie Fletcher and Matt Bevin. That's another point about how red. And let me ask you this, Tom Fawbush, and I appreciate where you're coming from. I think, though, that we have to be. I think it's healthy to have disagreement so that we get the best outcome, especially because, as you said, we're facing some real serious, some would call a crisis, some would say a very serious situation. Here's the thing is, though, and I think to Massey's point that he made in his comments, he really does want to see, he does understand that we're in a crisis. He would say, I understand we're in a crisis moment, and that's why I'm pushing that just talking about cutting spending of government isn't enough. You've got to actually do it. You've got to actually show that you're doing it. So I think there's a lot of agreement on that we're in a serious situation. I think where we're at in that, there's probably some differing of opinion. But let me ask you about that in terms of being such a red state, And it seems like the voters, Tom, here, they've sent Rand Paul back. They've reelected Congressman Massey, and yet they're going very strongly for Donald Trump in all 3 campaigns. What do you make of that?
I don't know. I think Kentucky generally has a good conservative instinct, and these men, Massey and Paul and Trump, all generally in a big picture represent conservative values, and in the way it's portrayed now under the MAGA sort of umbrella, and so. And so I think I am this way. I'm surprised at this disagreement at this juncture because I think a lot of it is just tactical moves to make a point, and these are just ways for the libertarian perspective within the Republican Party and within the MAGA movement to have its voice heard. And
Well,
I think that's what Massey and Paul are doing. But they're using the power of their vote to leverage that.
But I don't
discussion.
think cutting government spending is necessarily an exclusively libertarian point of view.
It's not.
I don't think cutting taxes is, and there's been a lot of agreement though.
That's a good point.
There's been a lot of agreement. The need to cut government spending and waste, where the rub is coming is in how we do that, how fast we do it, what it should look like right now, and how far we should go.
And how far we should prioritize it versus other issues.
Yeah, another question before this segment's up, because then the next thing I want to talk about Fayette County public school taxes. But in this segment, what about Kentucky? We have this Democratic governor who's increasingly aligned himself with radical leftists. I mean, overtly, he's not apologized for it, and yet he still keeps talking about unity and about coming together. I mean,
there was an article yesterday in the what they call Not the Bee.
Yeah, I read it this morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just, it's amazing that Beshear is getting that national coverage, and it's a great article because it really nails it home. Listen, you're dealing with a faux moderate here. You're dealing with somebody that's portraying themselves as a moderate, but his actions have shown the opposite, and so. And he's more draconian, more authoritarian than most governors, than all the governors in the U.S. when it comes to certain issues like, hey, I'm going to put the power of the state, and I'm going to take down your license plate if you go to church, and we're going to quarantine you for 14 days.
Quick question on that though: do you think people, the persona, right? Do you think? I think people sometimes forget what happened. They have a very short political memory. Here, about what's happened. And that might be part of the problem.
Do you think COVID justified those actions in a lot of people's minds?
In people's minds. I'm not saying I believe that, but I think.
Maybe in some people's minds. But now we look back on COVID and realize that maybe we've overreacted a bit on some of the how we act. We shouldn't have shut the country down for a year.
Well, isn't it ironic here? You've got Beshear talking at a No Kings rally.
That's right.
And no one
acted
overreached
like
his power more than he did.
That's
the
exactly
boundaries.
right, yeah.
Yes, he did that. Well, thank you, Tom Fawbush, for sitting in here. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
This segment, great segment. Thanks for joining us here on Kentucky's Voice. Coming up, the Fayette County Public Schools are going to be audited, and our state auditor has decided that's a good move, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But we need to talk about why that needs to happen briefly, because we've been following this here on Kentucky's Voice Radio. Stay with us. Don't go away. 502-571-0970. We'll hear from you.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
And Jim Waters back with you here on the final segment of today's Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for staying with us. By the way, you can catch this show this afternoon at 4 p.m. on WBNA Channel 21, and it's video replay, so you can both hear us and watch us, and I hope you'll make that part of your day as well. But thanks for being with us here live on the radio each day. And, Tom Fawbush being an old radio guy, well, not
Yeah.
Oh, I've been around for a while.
I'm both
on
old and a radio guy, so yeah, I'll go with that.
I started when I was a teenager, but
That's right.
anyhow, it's great to have. It's great to have us on both, really, the radio and the TV. And
That is right.
I know this is
And social media.
and
we're on
social
YouTube.
media.
Yeah,
we're
YouTube, yeah.
we're ramping that up and really giving that some intentional focus as well, which when you start doing that with the good content, and Andrew Cooper on your show yesterday, great show with Representative Josh Callaway. And, folks, what we're trying to do here is bring different personalities, different perspectives. I think it's healthy. Again, please understand we're not all going to say everything the same way. It's not all going to be the same. And that's going to make it interesting. Tune in every day because you don't know exactly what's going to happen. But this off of our Kentucky's Voice text line, 502-571-0970. Texter was asking us to repeat where you can find the article on Beshear. And it's a great article by Heck. Is it? I've got his first name somewhere here, but anyhow, Heck is the last name. Just type that in. Not the Bee. Great publication.
Not the Bee.
If you've heard of the Babylon Bee, the Not the Bee is really, I love what they're doing.
Yeah, sort of a parallel publication they do online that's more of a newspaper, sort of an online newspaper of impact. So, yeah.
I love it. Well, a couple of weeks ago, we discussed a vote taken by the Fayette County Public Schools Board of Education, which has done their fair share of getting into taxpayers' pockets and grabbing everything they can over the past decade. This is a school district that spends $24,000 per pupil. Only 1 in 3 of their students can read proficiently. Fewer than that can do math. Their low-income minority students are being left behind, almost 90% in some cases. But here they are, back again, voting for another tax increase. A few weeks ago, the Fayette County Public Schools voted to raise, get this now, not the property tax, which is within their purview, but the occupational tax. Now, you got to understand how egregious this really is. Even the left is saying this is egregious. Now, if you're talking about tax increase for public schools and the left is saying, this is not going to fly, you know that it's bad and it's wrong. And that's what's happened in Lexington. The occupational tax, let me explain what that is. That is a tax on everyone who works in a county, even if they don't live there. This is the most unconstitutional tax that I have ever seen or heard of. As far as I know, Tom, no one has challenged the constitutionality of this. And maybe it's time to challenge, because think about that, folks. Why did this representative republic begin? What was one of the major factors in the beginning of this republic? And I'm sorry, at that time, it wasn't social issues. It was taxation without representation. And when I work in an area and I'm taxed and I don't have any say in who's elected and how those taxes are decided, that's taxation without representation. If it's not, please tell me what it is. Please enlighten me, all of you leftists out there who are listening to the show.
Maybe it's time for a tea party in Lexington, or maybe make it a bourbon party.
Yeah, exactly.
Pour all our bourbon out.
Well, anyhow, so here's the rub on this. Since they did this, first of all, there was a 3-2 vote to recommend to the Fayette County government, which on an occupational tax, there's an extra layer of protection. Everybody say, thank God for this, that there's an extra layer of protection for taxpayers, that the Fayette County government has to vote on this. The county government has to approve this. Well, the coverage of this, they had a school board member in there saying, well, the Fayette County government's just going to rubber stamp this, and that's what they said. They actually said that. Can you believe that? They actually said that. Well, they didn't. As a matter of fact, the Fayette County government did not rubber stamp this. But this came after a series of, I think, things that happened that I want to point out here, because we've been following this a little bit on this show. Now, the Fayette County Board of Education never misses an opportunity to propose or to raise taxes for people in that district. They never talk about the performance of the district. They never focus on how the dollars are being spent. It's just, we need more money, give us more money. 2018-19, there was another egregious tax, which I railed about on the radio. Unfortunately, this show wasn't on the air at that time, but I was in Lexington railing about it. But it was are you ready for this? A special property tax levy for safety. This was to put funds for metal detectors, for increased safety features in the schools. And this tax was approved by the Fayette County School Board at 13.2. This was going to raise over $13 million from the citizens there, even though the needs would be met after only a couple of years. But there again, how many taxes do you know, local, state, federal, otherwise, that have ever gone away after they were enacted? Very few.
Very few.
And now the residents of Lexington are still paying that safety tax 7 years later. And then in 2020 and 2021 and 22, now this is only 2 years after that tax, there was a property tax rate increase where they increased property taxes by as much as they could, a 4% increase, $11.5 million additional dollars per year. So that means since that time, there's been 40-some million additional dollars come into the coffers of the Fayette County Public Schools. And they, you know why they did 4%? Because anything above that, they have to go to the folks. They have to go to the voters, and they know that the voters are not going to approve. The voters are saying we are taxed enough already, not just in general, but by the public schools, and we're tired of it. We're frustrated about it. So here they come again now with a proposal to raise the occupational tax rate in this county. Now, the Lexington Herald leader, Linda Blackford, who it's just like a miracle, okay? It's when I saw this, Tom Fawbush, I believe in miracles. I believed in him before this, but I really believe in him now. When you get the columnist for the leftist Lexington Herald leader writing with a headline that says FCPS payroll tax debacle, definitely illegal and incredibly stupid. You know, it's a great day in conservative Kentucky when that happens. And Linda Blackford I was so pleased with this, but let me read a couple of things they said here. She said, the astounding defeat of school vouchers last year was a huge celebration of public education. That's her leftist views coming out. But she said, and this is very good, it was not a carte blanche for any school board to sneak through a tax hike that would raise, are you ready for this? Twice as much money as they need to fill a $16 million budget shortfall. Wow. Even if they had the law on their side, which they did not, who thought ramming through a tax hike with a fiscal court would be a good idea? Yeah. And even with all the outcry, they've now decided to do the thing properly with public notice. Well, that's a little bit too late on that. But let me read the end of this. She said now on June... This was before the local government said we're not going to do this. On June 23rd, they will pass with the same 3-2 vote, and a recall will immediately be in motion. And while Fayette County has always loyally supported tax hikes for schools and loyally defeated any recall efforts, the opponents will have a real shot this time around. That's not all, she said. Fayette's ham-handed handling of this nonsense has brought the Eye of Sauron beaming straight from Frankfurt into the John D. Price administration building. The state GOP is still smarting from the Amendment 2 loss, so picking a fight with state leaders who already have public education in their sights is idiotic. Think things are bad now? Wait until Auditor Allison Ball gets through auditing Fayette school finances. Then Tyler Murphy, that's the school board chairman, will probably write another Facebook page blaming everyone but himself. Now, the point here is,
well said.
The point, and since she wrote that, the auditor announced that she's going to do an audit on this. And here was the big red flag for her was they are saying we have a $16 million budget shortfall. This is how school boards operate in our state too many times, including here in Jefferson County.
That's right.
They're saying we have a $16 million budget shortfall. This is what they said. This is according to the school district. But they're going to implement a tax that would raise twice as much as that.
Twice as much as, yeah.
And even the leftist Herald Leader opinion writer.
Because we've ran this so well that we deserve twice as much as what we've already spent. It seems like, Jim, this is just another way for these blue cities, these big Democrat-run blue cities, to mitigate the problem of people leaving these cities. And so the occupational tax specifically. And so, okay, you want to leave Fayette County and go live in Midway, Kentucky, but still work in Lexington? Well, tell you what, we're going to tax you anyway just for working in Lexington
exactly.
now. So don't think you can get away from us. We're going to get you where you live. And that's right. You're totally unconstitutional.
In fact, the chairman of the Fayette County School Board, are you ready for this? Does not work in Lexington.
There we go.
He teaches
in Lexington.
In Danville.
Oh, really?
But he's the school board chairman of the Fayette County Public Schools. We can't make this stuff up. This is too good. Let me say this, though. I want to give a shout out to Auditor Allison Ball, because I know there's a lot of political pressure not to do anything that would, quote unquote, make our public school systems look bad. Let me be clear about this. Auditor Ball is not going to do that. Whatever she finds, it's not going to be her making the school district look bad. It's going to be her allowing the taxpayers to see what's really happening with their hard-earned dollars. And this school district, it's past time, and I think this is a wake-up call for the Fayette County Public Schools to stop playing fast and loose with taxpayer dollars. I mean, their superintendent up there is being paid as much as the Jefferson County Public Schools superintendent is. Their school district is half the size, but they've got to keep up with the Joneses. So it's not about, here's the problem with that. It's not about improving education for students. It's not about doing
money
a
is
better
not the
job.
solution.
It's not
Money is not the solution. Yeah.
It's not. And there's no example at all where throwing more money at this is going to fix it, especially when the resources that taxpayers have already provided have not been spent in a way that brings better results.
Exactly
it has not happened. It hasn't happened.
We need competition. We need competition in education, and that's coming. That is coming.
And it's coming. It's going to be here. It's only a question of if, not when. It's going to happen, folks. Great show today. Thanks for joining us. We encourage you to tune in this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Watch this again. Stay with us each weekday here on Kentucky's Voice, 11 to noon. Jim Waters, thanks again. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. It's Hump Day. Good news. It's all downhill from here. So don't despair. It's a good day. But glad to have you with us. And keep joining us each weekday here.